Listen, the economy is much better today than it was when Donald Trump left office.
If we're going to cherry pick the starting date.
Here's what we need to do to get costs down. One, we need to take on the price gougers. These big corporations are getting away with murder. The cost of a package of chicken has gone up by 30 to 40%, in part because of price collusion. So I continue to support efforts to go after those price gougers. We've got to put money back into the pockets of regular consumers. That means a child tax credit.
Hang on. Price collusion. First things first, that's already illegal. That's already illegal. So why haven't you been going after them? That's number one. Number two, if that's the explanation for this inflation, why wasn't the price what it was 10 years ago?
Mr. Murphy, Vice President Kamala Harris has proposed giving first-time homebuyers a $25,000 down payment. Would you support that proposal? And how do you think that would impact demand and housing costs? You have 90 seconds.
Oh my God, this is so good. What an actually brilliant question from WTNH.
I do support that proposal, and that's a really important proposal.
Hold on. Okay, so real quick. So this is a litmus test. This is a litmus test of economic literacy.
Issue of immigration.
Right,
Mr. Murphy.
Pause. How would this impact demand and housing costs? This is actually a great question because it's a litmus test of economic literacy, and he at best doesn't answer the question.
We had a chance to strengthen the border, but Republicans threw away that chance because they didn't want to give up their talking point. They didn't want to be able to. They didn't want to be in a position where they could stop complaining about the border and have us come together and do something about it together.
That's just not true.
There was an H.R. 2 bill that was sitting on Senator Chuck Schumer's desk that he didn't even have to waste the months of doing a bipartisan bill. And that H.R. 2 bill,
we're going to get to
remain in Mexico,
Mr. Corey,
build the border wall,
move on to our next
and
question.
catch and release.
Let's turn now to the Middle East, where fighting has escalated in the region. The U.S.
That was actually brilliant.
I know that doesn't seem possible in Connecticut, but if the Republican Party platform was put into law,
then it would be put into law, and it already is. The overturning of Roe v. Wade did what in Connecticut, Murphy?
Then no one in Connecticut is safe.
No one in Connecticut is safe? Jesus Christ, the rhetoric.
But this election, frankly, is going to decide, likely, whether women in this country and possibly whether women in Connecticut have the right to be able to make their own decisions about their health care future. This is...
They already do. They already do right now.
Under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, we lost jobs over the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
We've
never created more jobs than we've created in the 4-year period of time that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been in charge. We lost 100.
Yeah, I'm not even taking notes on this. This is so bad. This keeps getting brought up. We can cherry pick the date, right? So you can see, here's what happened. COVID. We had this excellent growth rate, right? That's what's in this red here under Trump. And then we had COVID, and COVID had the V-shaped recovery under Trump. And then right here, that's when the inauguration took place. And then everything flattens out. Wow. Hold on. This is a brutal question.
But I support every law-abiding citizen's right to own a gun, and I'll continue to do that.
Mr. Murphy.
Bullshit.
That was a dodge. 30 seconds, Mr. Corey, we begin with you.
Time out.
The change began.
I love the look on Murphy's face because that was such a fucking dodge. Damn. WTNH gets a solid A. Maybe not an A+, but a solid A. In under an hour, in 45 minutes, you guys managed to ask a ton of really good questions. And in a very fair and even-handed manner. Okay, here we go. Now I've got it. I don't know why it's coming in. Captions off. Here we go.
Somebody that actually represents Connecticut.
Looking to do something no Republican has done in the state of Connecticut in 42 years.
I think the voters are seeing what's happening with their pocketbooks. I think they want to change.
I get to represent Connecticut in the Senate, and I hope that people still see the joy and the enthusiasm that I bring to the job.
A global pandemic, transition of power, record inflation, and 6 years separates the two candidates from the last time they faced off. So what has changed? And where do they stand now on the issues you care most about? Live from your local election headquarters in New Haven, this is the 2024 Connecticut U.S. Senate debate.
Good evening and welcome to the Connecticut U.S. Senate debate. This is the only time these two candidates will face off before the election. I'm Dennis House.
And I'm Catherine Hauser. We are so glad that you're here with us. We have a lot of ground to cover, but first we begin with the debate rules. Mr. Murphy, Mr. Corey, you will each have 90 seconds to answer a question. Each rebuttal will get 45 seconds, and you'll get 15 seconds for a clarification. And both candidates will have 30 seconds for a closing statement. Time will be kept in our control room, and a sign here in the studio will let each candidate know that they have 15 seconds left. And then you'll hear this bell, and that will let you know when your time is up.
And we encourage you who are watching to share your concerns on X. Look for the hashtag CT Senate Debate and use that, where you'll find all of the sources we used to develop our questions tonight. And with that, let's get started. The economy is a major issue for Connecticut residents and the leading issue in our recent Next Star Media poll. A basket of groceries that cost $100 in 2020 is now almost $126. Mr. Murphy, can you give us one specific thing you would do moving forward to lower costs for Connecticut consumers? You have 90 seconds.
Well, Dennis, Catherine, WTNH, thank you very much for hosting this debate. For those of you who were tuning in to watch Jeopardy, I'm sorry. But I think you're going to see an interesting set of differences between the two candidates and the two parties. Listen, the economy is much better today than it was when Donald Trump left office.
If we're going to cherry pick the starting date.
Low, factory construction is booming, inflation is much lower. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck in this economy today, things are really tough. During my walk across Connecticut this year, I spent some time with an older man named Izzy, and he had worked for one of these big multinational corporations. He had played by the rules.
We might actually have to open up a new tab for notes, because he said times are tough, but he's also been the incumbent for over a decade now. So, like, what are we doing here? And you guys have had a majority in the Senate for at least 2 years now. I'm pretty sure they've had at least some element of majority in the Senate for the entirety of Biden's tenure. So, like, what are we talking about here? So, yeah, I may have to, let me know if you guys want me to show how I take notes and review these sorts of things in the comment section here.
Rules his entire life, but they didn't give him a pension. So when he retired, he was left with only Social Security income, and it just didn't pay enough for him to be able to meet his bills. And so we have to be serious about helping people like Izzy. Here's what we need to do to get costs down. One, we need to take on the price gougers. These big corporations are getting away with murder. The cost of a package of chicken has gone up by 30 to 40%, in part because of price collusion. So I continue to support efforts to go after those price gougers. We've got to put money back into the pockets of regular consumers. That means a child tax credit.
Hang on. Price collusion. First things first, that's already illegal. That's already illegal. So why haven't you been going after them? That's number one. Number two, if that's the explanation for this inflation, why wasn't the price what it was 10 years ago? If they can just get away with this collusive price gouging, why didn't they do this 10 years ago? Why didn't they do this 4 years ago under Donald Trump? Why wouldn't they? Why didn't they do this under Barack Obama or under George Bush? Where is this coming from? I mean, this is a swing and a miss from an economic standpoint. Yeah, I'm going to have to start taking notes. We may have to rewind this real quick. Let's do Google Docs. Here we go. Murphy, opening. Yeah, let's rewind this a little bit. And let's start taking notes.
Well, Dennis, Catherine, WTNH, thank you very much for hosting this debate. For those of you who were tuning in to watch Jeopardy, I'm sorry. But I think you're going to see an interesting set of differences between the two candidates and the two parties. Listen, the economy is much better today than it was when Donald Trump left office.
The economy is much better? Trump left office? How? Okay, so real quick, how does this answer the question? Right? Because if it's better, then if you're presupposing that the economy is not in a good state and people are having a hard time, like you just said, then how is this an answer to this question? That's number one. Number two, I suppose if you cherry pick the starting point and cherry pick the data that you're going to use, that is to some extent true. But there was this thing in 2020. Was the pandemic a pandemic? Or was it just a case of Wu flu? Was it just a case of the Kung flu that we never should have shut people down for? Or was it an actual pandemic? And if it's an actual once-in-a-century pandemic, then wouldn't you excuse certain portions of that pandemic? Wouldn't you expect that if that was the case, you get the V-shaped recovery that we did get under Trump and that leveled off under Biden? And I have, folks, if you want to see that, I can bring those photos up. So, all right.
Unemployment is low, factory construction is booming, inflation is much lower. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck in this economy today, things are really tough. During my walk across Connecticut this year, I spent some time with an older man named Izzy, and he had worked for one of these big multinational corporations. He had played by the rules his entire life, but they didn't give him a pension. So when he retired, he was left with only Social Security income, and it just didn't pay enough for him to be able to meet his bills. And so we have to be serious about helping people like Izzy. Here's what we need to do to get costs down. One, we need to take on the price gougers. These big corporations are getting away with murder. The cost of a package of chicken has gone up by 30 to 40%, in part because of Izzy, and he had worked for one of these big multinational corporations. He had played by the rules his entire life, but they didn't give him a pension. So when he retired, he was left with only Social Security income, and it just didn't pay enough for him to be able to meet his bills. And so we have to be serious about helping people like Izzy. Here's what we need to do to get costs down. One, we need to take on the price gougers. These big corporations are getting away with murder. The cost of a package of chicken has gone up by 30 to 40%, in part because of price collusion. So I continue to support efforts to go after those price gougers. We've got to put money back into the pockets of regular consumers. That means a child tax credit for families that need help. What we don't need is more tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires, as supported by Donald Trump, or a $4,000 tax increase, as he's proposing, due to a set of thoughtless and insane tariffs. So the focus has got to be on people like Izzy.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Corey, same question. You give us one
out. So when Trump was talking about those tariffs, you guys do understand that like what he was talking about was supplanting the entire income tax with tariffs instead. So time out, like the $4,000 increase due to tariffs, but you're also getting rid of all of your income tax. You guys tell me in the comment section, if you paid $4,000 to the Fed instead of whatever you're paying now in income taxes, for like a middle American, like if you're paying nothing in the first place, then you're probably not part of that conversation, part of that median income that I'm sure this is referring to. But it would for folks in the comment section, let me know, would $4,000 be less than the tax amount, the amount that you're being taxed by the federal government? Would your federal taxes go down if that's all you were paying? I mean, we've got price collusion, which is already illegal, and a bigger child tax credit. So there's a Christian nationalist actually argument for a larger child tax credit. But what he's talking about in this form of this tax credit, I'm sure, is like an earned income credit, which is that it's actually money going into your checking account rather than money that wouldn't come out. So with price collusion, first things first, Chris, that's already illegal. And You've been the incumbent for, 12 years now? At least 12 years. And it's already illegal. If you were going to go after that, why weren't you going after that? That's number one. And number two, if that's what's causing the prices to increase, if that's what's causing the price of a chicken to go up by 30-something% in an extremely cutthroat market, number one, I want to see evidence. I want to see actual evidence of this claim, number one. Number two, I want you to actually tell me, what is the legal mechanism for going after this other than to just institute price controls, which is the most economically illiterate thing you could possibly prescribe. And I don't have time to go into it now. If you guys want me to go into the economics behind the thing, I can. I really don't want to, because it's just such a level of economic illiteracy that I don't want to go into it. So if you're just going to just prosecute actual collusive anti-competitive behavior, we already have a mechanism for doing that. And by the way, if it's going on now, if that's what caused those prices to increase, if they could just get away with the price gouging that you're claiming that they're getting away with, why didn't they do that 4 years ago? Why didn't they do that 4 years ago? Why didn't they do that even under Barack Obama, if I'm to be apolitical about this? Why didn't they do that under George Bush? Why isn't the price of a whole chicken $650? Why isn't it $6,000? If they can just get away with this, if this is really what's somehow going on behind the scenes without any evidence to support the thing, what are we talking about here?
Specific thing you would do to lower costs for Connecticut consumers. You have 90 seconds.
Well, the senator doesn't want you to believe your lying eyes. We can see how high prices are all around. We can see the job losses. We can see a lot of small businesses closing down. He was proud to vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, which put $7 trillion into this economy that we didn't need. Rose your prices of gas, groceries. I don't have to tell you. You could go to any supermarket, you'll see what the prices cost. If you look all around our state, small businesses are closing down, hospitalities, their businesses are closing down, 2,900 jobs out of Aetna are being lost. See a lot of small businesses closing down. He was proud to vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, which put $7 trillion into this economy that we didn't need. Rose your prices of gas, groceries. I don't have to tell you. You could go to any supermarket, you'll see what the prices cost. If you look all around our state, small businesses are closing down, hospitalities, their businesses are closing down, 2,900 jobs out of Aetna are being lost. What we need to do is we need pro-growth policies. Senator Murphy is proposing in the next administration to add another $5 trillion in tax increases and spending that's out of control. What we need to do is we need to bring corporations back, lowering the corporate tax rate, lowering the small business tax rate, lowering the income tax rate. We need pro-growth policies to bring back to Connecticut. We need pro-growth policies. Supermarket, you'll see what the prices cost. If you look all around our state, small businesses are closing down, hospitalities, their businesses are closing down, 2,900 jobs out of Aetna are being lost. What we need to do is we need pro-growth policies. Senator Murphy is proposing in the next administration to add another $5 trillion in tax increases and spending that's out of control. What we need to do is we need to bring corporations.
All right, so let's go to his actual solutions first. And we'll come back to that.
Lowering the corporate tax rate, lowering the small business tax rate, lowering the income tax rate. We need pro-growth policies to bring back to Connecticut. We used to be on a global market here. We used to be the gateway to New England. We need to bring jobs back to this state, and with tax and spend policies coming out of Washington, that means they're completely out of touch. And this isn't taxes for millionaires and billionaires. It was proven there was more money going into the government coffers. It's the spending that needs to be cut and the wasteful spending. There was over $1 trillion in wasteful spending in that package that they had, that they put forth. We need somebody down in Washington that understands business, understands the effect of policies that they bring home and how it affects individuals and businesses every single day. And I'm that guy to do that.
Mr. Corey, thank you. Catherine.
Turning now to the cost of housing.
Okay, so that seems like, I don't know, that seems absolutely reasonable. And he's actually correct. So let's add this claim. Let's add this as a claim. Total tax revenues increased during Trump tax reduction. That's actually true. I don't even have to look this up. And that's not controversial, actually. So that's one of his claims. And another one of his claims was, he was pretty rapid fire there, so you'll have to forgive me.
$5 trillion in tax increase. Prices of gas, groceries. I don't have to tell you. You could go to any supermarket, you'll see what the prices cost. If you look all around our state, small businesses are closing down, hospitalities, their businesses are closing down, 2,900 jobs out of Aetna are being lost. What we need to do is we need pro-growth policies. Senator Murphy is proposing in the next administration to add another $5 trillion in tax increases and spending that's out of control. What we need to do is we need to bring corporations back, lowering the corporate tax rate, lowering the small business tax rate, lowering the income tax rate. We need pro-growth policies to bring back to Connecticut. We used to be on a global market here.
Yeah,
we used to be the gateway to New England.
That seems totally
We need
believable.
to bring jobs back to this state, and with tax and spend policies
Oh
coming
my God,
out of
we got to
Washington,
pause.
lowering the small business tax rate, lowering the income tax rate. We need and I'm that guy to do that.
Mr. Corey, thank you. Catherine.
Turning now to the cost of housing. Housing affordability is another important issue for Connecticut voters. The Connecticut Housing Finance Authority says there is a shortage of 92,000 affordable housing units here in our state. Mr. Corey, I begin with you. What specific policies are you supporting to increase the availability of affordable housing in Connecticut? You have 90 seconds.
Once again, that is lowering the cost of doing business, lowering the inflation costs. We have young kids that are trying to buy houses between 27 and 28. It's out of their reach and out of their touch because of the inflation that this administration has caused. And just let's get this straight. He embraces every policy that the vice president said she wouldn't change anything that happened in the last 3.5 years. We can't afford another 4 years of tax increases. We need to lower this economy. Affordable housing, just think about that word, what you're talking about, affordable. Things are out of reach. I have young kids trying to buy a house. It's $20,000, $30,000 above asking cost all the time. We need to bring jobs back here. What is happening is zoning's got to take control of that. We need more multifamily units. It didn't help that we had over 11 billion people come into this country illegally who took up a lot of the housing. We had a lot of young kids who are moving out of state. We need to create more housing and more housing opportunities. But affordable, that's a zoning issue. We hope that the towns and the states can work together to make sure they have the right housing for the right people in some of those areas that people can't afford, and we need to lower those prices. But the main thing is making it affordable. And how do you do that? Is lowering the cost of doing business and lowering the cost of taxes. And this administration hasn't done that.
Mr. Murphy, Vice President Kamala Harris has proposed giving first-time homebuyers a $25,000 down payment. Would you support that proposal? And how do you think that would impact demand and housing costs? You have 90 seconds.
Oh my God, this is
support
so good. What an actually brilliant question from WTNH. Holy cow, I've got to give her credit. We got to get this one. What a great question. I was not expecting this.
Payment. Would you support that proposal?
But the main thing is making it affordable. And how do you do that? Is lowering the cost of doing business and lowering the cost of taxes. And this administration hasn't done that.
Mr. Murphy, Vice President Kamala Harris has proposed giving first-time homebuyers a $25,000 down payment. Would you support that proposal? And how do you think that would impact demand and housing costs? You have 90 seconds.
I do support that proposal, and that's a really important proposal.
Hold on. Okay, so real quick, Murphy. So we're gonna put this in bold. Let's see if he actually answers this part of the question. How is that going to impact demand and housing costs? This is a litmus test. This is a litmus test of economic literacy. Guys, in the comments, tell me what you guys think. Tell me what you guys think this is going to do. Tell me what you guys think just handing out $25,000 to first-time home buyers is going to do. What happens when you just print more money and pump it into the market?
For Connecticut. We want our young people in Connecticut to be able to stay here, but many of them leave because it is very difficult for those young families to be able to afford that initial down payment. But I frankly agree with Mr. Corey that one of the biggest problems here is that it is far too costly to build housing in this state and in this country. So I do think it's important to be able to bring down the overall cost, the regulatory burden of building new houses. The tax cut that Donald Trump is talking about is 80% geared towards people who are making $1 million or more. Kamala Harris is talking about tax cuts that are going to be invested in middle-class families, in young families, those families that are struggling with housing costs today. Donald Trump also suggests that the way to solve the housing crisis is to build more housing on public lands. Well, we don't really have federal lands in Connecticut, so that's a proposal that might help other parts of the country, but not here in Connecticut. So let's bring down the cost of housing. Let's cut the regulatory burdens that many developers face. And yes, let's give tax breaks and tax cuts not to millionaires and billionaires and corporations. Let's give them to first-time home buyers. That would be a big help to a lot of families here in Connecticut.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you. Dennis.
Let's turn now to the issue of immigration.
Right,
Mr. Murphy.
Pause. How would this, right? We're going to zoom in so you guys can read it nice and clearly. Let's make sure I have everything set up correctly. All right, here we go. Get our notes. All right, let's get our notes right to the front. How would this impact demand and housing costs? I really hope she kicks that over to Corey, but I see that she's not, because this is actually a great question, because it's a litmus test of economic literacy, and he at best doesn't answer the question. And the truth is that this is going to significantly increase demand. And when you significantly increase demand overall, you significantly increase the equilibrium pricing point, which means you're necessarily increasing housing costs. That's going to be the case for, the 24-year-old couple that wants to buy their first house, the 34-year-old couple that wants to buy their first house. That's going to be true of the private developer too, who's buying houses kind of in bulk, right? So, and buying property in bulk, even if you're talking about somebody who's trying to buy, a bunch of housing on a block, or the developer who wants to put in multifamily units, that's going to drive that demand up. Because what you now have is the capacity to buy more, which means that with that $25,000 down payment, in the end, you're going to wind up driving up housing costs. This is really basic supply and demand. This is really, really, really basic introductory level economics. In the end, you're going to just wind up driving housing costs, and also you're going to drive up the costs for things across the market, because you're just how are you going to pay for that? And the answer is print more money. Money printer go burr, right? And Murphy in this case supports this proposal. Okay. So then we're going to need some pretty extreme economic literacy to somehow get to support this proposal, knowing what it's going to have in terms of its impact on demand and housing costs. Many young people leave because they can't afford the initial down payment. Okay, no, they're leaving because it's just generally too costly in this state. By the way, we've already gone over with the things that predict internal migration across states, right? And the biggest thing is jobs. The biggest thing by a mile is the availability of quality employment, which is, bring jobs back here. And Matt Corey said the increase in affordable housing, lowering the cost of doing business, lowering inflation costs, lowering taxes. This speaks to both of the two issues that are the primary drivers for interstate migration. Number one, jobs by a mile. Number two, cost of living by a mile. And then numbers 3, 4, 5 account for such a small percentage of why it is people engage in interstate migration. Internal migration from one state to the next within the U.S. is such a small percentage that basically the whole thing can be explained in jobs and cost of living. And this is what we're talking about here. At least he's speaking toward what the actual motivations are, right? As far as the 11 million coming here illegally to take housing, I really don't care about the actual number, because here's what he's speaking toward is the economics of the thing. And he also repeated that the main thing, which is why I gave this double stars, is what he mentioned off the bat. The lowering the cost of doing business, lowering inflation costs, lowering taxes are the primary motivators for driving down these costs. Now, what Murphy said was the only thing he said that kind of fits into this into the actual principles of economics. Okay, yeah, we do have that lined up right. Pardon me. Is that it's far too costly to build new homes. Well, why? Mostly, what developers will tell you is the regulatory environment, right? So he's talking about regulatory burdens. I kind of don't believe him, but I think there is an uncharitable way to interpret this, which is based on the record, which we briefly talked about when Billy Mo Buckby and Pat Callahan came on, which is that the state and here in Connecticut wants to basically subsume local zoning ordinances and subsume local zoning boards. And we've talked about that a ton on this show. And that like the real solution here is devolution. And if you want to have a town that's extremely restrictive in private development, you can have that. And then you're not going to have much private development. If you want to have a town that's less restrictive in private development, you will have more private development. And that speaks to the actual motivations it speaks to what people actually want at the local level. So tax breaks to the first-time home buyers, that's not what that $25,000 is. It is actually a check printed that's going to be printed by, in all likelihood, the federal treasury, in the amount of $25,000. People who can't afford to buy a house for the first time and can't get over that hump of that hump of the down payment, like they're not paying $25,000 in taxes. I'm sorry. Like there's no way to reduce that tax rate without just like Donald Trump says, eliminating eliminating income taxes. So yeah, I mean, this is a litmus test of economic literacy. And I think that Murphy is failing it quite miserably, actually. So let me get this shrunk down just a bit. Put this back where it was. Do some window adjustments. Okay. So yeah, I don't think, not only did he fail the litmus test, I'm not so sure he actually answered the question.
2 people are under arrest in connection with a homicide in Stamford. Police say both were linked to Venezuelan gangs and were in this country illegally. Do you believe the Biden-Harris administration has been aggressive enough to keep people like this out of Connecticut? You have 90 seconds.
Well, let me say this first. I believe that Connecticut is stronger because of our immigrant communities. I live in the south end of Hartford, and my neighborhood is better off because we have people from all over the world, from Central America, South America, because
linked to Venezuelan gangs and were in this country illegally. Do you believe?
Wow, hold on. $113,000 undocumented immigrants in Connecticut. I got to give WTNH credit. These are really properly legitimate and challenging questions for Chris Murphy. Like, I was not expecting this.
Believe the Biden-Harris administration has been aggressive enough to keep people like this out of Connecticut. You have 90 seconds.
Well, let me say this first. I believe that Connecticut is stronger because of our immigrant communities. I live in the south end of Hartford, and my neighborhood is better off because we have people from all over the world, from Central America, South America, the Pacific, coming to live in Connecticut, often fleeing terror and torture and economic desperation. I don't believe this rhetoric from the right that we should fear our neighbors or that we should fear immigrants that are coming for a better life into this country. But I do believe in border security, so much so that I was the lead Democrat negotiating the toughest bipartisan border security bill in a generation, a bill that would have allowed the president to shut down the border when crossings were too high. It would have invested billions of new dollars in personnel and infrastructure at the border so we can make sure that we apprehend anybody that is coming to this country to commit crimes. That bill would have passed if not for Donald Trump. Donald Trump told his supporters in the United States Senate to kill that bill because it would have been good politically for Democrats. Donald Trump knew that that bill would have helped to secure the border, and so he told his supporters, kill it because we want chaos at the border. Chaos at the border helps Republicans and hurts Democrats, so let's kill this good bipartisan border bill. I think we can celebrate this nation's history of immigration. We can celebrate immigrant communities while getting the border under control, and I'm sorry we lost that opportunity earlier this year.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Corey, there are several sanctuary cities throughout Connecticut, including...
I want to hear his response to this because there was a lot to talk about there. I really want to hear Corey's response. I hope he gets a chance to respond to this. That was a lot. There's a lot to unpack.
Build this good bipartisan border bill. I think we can celebrate this nation's history of immigration. We can celebrate immigrant communities while getting the border under control. And I'm sorry we lost that opportunity earlier this year.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Corey, there are several sanctuary cities throughout Connecticut, including New Haven, Hartford, and Middletown. One estimate places the number of undocumented immigrants in Connecticut at over 100,000. You have called for ending sanctuary cities, essentially revoking federal funds from those cities. Would you take it a step further and support large-scale deportations? You have 90 seconds.
Well, look, I want to get back to what Senator Murphy said. Look, we want a diverse community. I live in a diverse community. I've been in the city of Hartford for over...
This is Corey.
$32 with my businesses. We're not talking about legal immigration. We're talking about illegal immigration. Senator Murphy wants to twist those words. That border bill was not a great bipartisan border bill. It would allow over 5,000 people coming into this country illegally. What else would it allow? Fentanyl to pour across our border, unaccompanied minors to pour across our border. Senator Murphy wants to tell you that President Trump killed that bill. There was 6 Democratic senators that voted against that. I'm pretty sure President Trump doesn't have much sway over Senator Cory Booker or even Senator Bernie Sanders. So this bill was a failure. It's still catch and release is what is wrong in this country. And I'm not talking about a mass deportation, but the people that need to be eliminated from this country are the people that are committing the most heinous crimes. And because of sanctuary city status, the local police, state police can't work with ICE. Now, I know Senator Murphy walked across the state and he stopped in Norwich, stopped at the library. I'm sure they have a wonderful library. But where he should have stopped was at the police station and fire station to say, how much more Narcan do you guys need because of all the fentanyl that's pouring across our border? But where he really should have stopped was at Casey Chadwick's mother's house, because Casey Chadwick was killed by an illegal alien that was here, that had an ICE detainer on him and should have been deported. But because of sanctuary city status, he wasn't.
Mr. Corey, just to clarify, I'll give you 15 seconds. Do you support mass deportations?
I would start with the people that are committing the most heinous crimes.
Okay.
And then we would look at how people got here, not people that got here on no fault of their own, but the people that committed the most heinous crimes.
And Mr. Murphy, I'll give you 45 seconds to respond.
Okay, so it sounds like what he's talking about is in answering this question, it's we didn't get a yes or a no, but I think it's because it's a more nuanced question. Do you support large-scale deportations? I don't think that he's saying so I think his distinction is, if we start with the people committing the most heinous crimes, which really aren't that many people, that isn't a large-scale deportation. That is just deportations. We're talking about illegal immigration, so he apparently doesn't care to do anything about legal immigration. And yeah, he did actually get a chance to respond to that border bill, which, yeah, it was a bad bill. It would have given granted effective legal status to 1.8 million immigrants a year, in addition to what we were already allowing. So Murphy using this trope that is the bipartisan border bill that Donald Trump killed. No, most of the Republicans already weren't really in favor of the thing. What you had was a huge amount, basically a supermajority of Democrats and just enough Republicans to get the thing passed. And then Donald Trump called in and was like, hey, you should actually read this bill and read the contents of the bill because it kind of sucks. And it does.
Well, listen, I just don't understand why we didn't take the chance to invest the $40 billion in the bipartisan bill in border security. I think Republicans like to complain about the border, but don't end up ever actually proposing solutions. We had a chance to strengthen the border, but Republicans threw away that chance because they didn't want to give up their talking point. They didn't want to be able to. They didn't want to be in a position where they could stop complaining about the border and have us come together and do something about it together.
That's just not true.
There was an H.R. 2 bill that was sitting on Senator Chuck Schumer's desk that he didn't even have to waste the months of doing a bipartisan bill. And that H.R. 2 bill
we're going to get to
remain in Mexico,
Mr. Corey,
build the border wall,
we're going to move on to our next
and
question.
end catch and release.
Let's turn now to the Middle East, where fighting has escalated in the region. The U.S.
That was actually brilliant. That was actually brilliant. All of those things from in H.R. 2 were not in this supposedly bipartisan border bill. Man, I gotta write that down. Let's see, Murphy. And then Corey. Yeah. So far, this is a major win. If you believe in the truth, this is a major win.
Recently deployed approximately 100 more troops to Israel. Mr. Corey, we'll begin with you here. Should the U.S. deploy more forces to the region? And is there anything Israel could do that you would not support? You have 90 seconds.
Look, I served over in the Middle.
This is a really good question. Damn, WTNH, man, like these local TV stations.
Chuck Schumer's desk that he didn't even have to waste the months of doing a bipartisan bill. And that H.R. 2 bill
we're going to get to
remain in Mexico,
Mr. Corey,
build the border wall,
move on to our next
and end
question.
catch and release.
Let's turn now to the Middle East, where fighting has escalated in the region. The U.S. recently deployed approximately 100 more troops to Israel. Mr. Corey, we'll begin with you here. Should the U.S. deploy more forces to the region? And is there anything Israel could do that you would not support? You have 90 seconds.
Look, I served over in the Middle East.
Oh, that's really good. That's a really good question. Guys who are fans of Matt Corey, you better hope he answers this question. That second part is actually a really good question. Yeah, the use of the use of nuclear weapons, of course. That'd be one right off the bat. End of story. No nukes. Non-retaliatory strikes to countries in the Middle East, like Egypt, the bombing of Egypt. I wouldn't support that. Saudi Arabia, same thing. Let's see if he gives an answer.
In 1983, when they blew up the Marine barracks.
The U.S. deploy more forces to the region, and is there anything Israel could do that you would not support? You have 90 seconds.
Look, I served over in the Middle East, unfortunately, in 1983 when they blew up the Marine barracks. Senator Murphy's policies were appeasement. He went against the entire Trump administration, the previous administration, went against Secretary Pompeo, went against the maximum pressure policies on Iran. Senator Murphy was all for taking the Houthis off the terrorist organization watch list. Right now, today, we have the largest naval engagement we've had since World War II. This stuff wouldn't have happened. Iran was on its knees. What happened? They were sitting on over $200 or $300 billion because of oil sales. The Houthi rebels, Hezbollah, and Hamas are attacking Israel on all fronts. I unequivocally support Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu because he is the only person today, is the leader of the free world, the face of the free world, and we are withholding information. And what Senator Murphy wanted to do was pull military assets out of there. That is a wrong move. I support Prime Minister, and I hope he can eradicate
I have no idea
people from Lebanon that are Hezbollah and Hamas, so those people can live in peace.
Mr. Corey, thank you. Mr. Murphy, you chair
okay, that actually was a non-answer. Matt Corey, you got to do better on that one. Should the U.S. deploy more forces to the region? That question wasn't answered. Is there anything Israel could do that you would not support? That question wasn't answered. I can answer both of those questions. Should the U.S. deploy more forces to the region? Israel, no. No, this is not our war. Right? Like everything he said is totally fine. Wholeheartedly agree with it. Israel, go out, do whatever you need to kick ass. But it's your country, your problem. This is not our country. This is not our problem. We've got our own problems to deal with. And then until those problems are actually directly threatened, like they were in World War II, right? When Hawaii was bombed, when Pearl Harbor, which was at that point not quite a state, it was a territory. But when territories are U.S. soil, when U.S. soil was bombed by the Japanese, we went to war, right? So, no, I can unequivocally say, Benjamin Netanyahu, do whatever you need to do. You're not getting any more from us, period. I can also then say that what would I not support Israel doing? I would not support Israel engaging in, let's say, a major occupation of, let's say, Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula, of Lower Turkey, of Iraq, of Saudi Arabia. I would not support any sort of bombing missions to those countries. I would not support the use of nuclear devices under just about any circumstance in that area. Yeah, I mean, if this is about terrorism, this is not about carpet bombing, this is not about nuking an entire city. So yeah, I can answer both of those questions. And unfortunately, Corey sounded pretty good so far. He didn't answer those two questions.
Senate subcommittee focused on the Middle East, and you've been critical of Israel's actions in Gaza. Should the U.S. send more troops and weapons to the region? You have 90 seconds.
So what happened on October 7th of last year is unconscionable. It's horrific. And Israel has the right, the obligation to defend itself. And I support their efforts to make sure that Hamas can never, ever again launch the attacks that we saw on that day. I think you can believe that, but also believe that far too many civilians have lost their life in Gaza. I frankly think that's what most people here in Connecticut believe, that Israel should defend itself, but that the carnage inside Gaza has been too significant. What I want is a ceasefire. I want a ceasefire that brings those hostages home, that ends the hostilities and gets us back on a path so that the Palestinians can have their own state side by side with a safe Israel. I don't think the United States should be directly involved in this conflict. We obviously have to protect our forces in the region, but ultimately we need to work towards de-escalation so that we can stop the fighting, we can begin the process of rebuilding Gaza and Lebanon, and we can find the Palestinians a home, which is the only way to bring long-term peace to the region.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Whoa.
Catherine.
Now to the topic.
Time out. Find Palestinians a home. Yeah, okay, this is a dubious claim. This is an extremely dubious claim. Yeah, and the fact that he immediately leveraged the number of citizens that have died in Gaza, I don't care. I don't care, right? I want a ceasefire, and I want to bring the hostages home. Okay, Israel is not going to engage in a ceasefire that doesn't involve bringing the hostages home. They're just not going to. And every attempt that they've made to establish a ceasefire, they've had this condition, and Hamas has utterly rejected it at every opportunity. And Israel has done this repeatedly over the last few months, and in fact now a year. And Gaza and Hamas just refuses to engage, just refuses to to deal with anything other than a very Hamas-friendly ceasefire that doesn't involve handing over all of the remaining hostages. And quite frankly, the Palestine side by side with Israel, we can get into a much longer debate about that. But I don't think that this is the goal. Like, do you see what he's done here? The work toward de-escalation and not work toward victory. So I think Matthew Corey would respond by saying work toward victory. And, so the only thing he does actually answer the question, at least, should the U.S. send more troops and weapons to the region? His answer was no. Yeah, I don't know. Find Palestinians a home, which is the only way to bring peace to the region. No, the only way to bring peace to the region is for these terrorist groups to be eliminated. That's the only way. And quite frankly, just finding the Palestinians a home is not going to resolve that.
Of abortion, Mr. Murphy, we begin with you. Vice President Kamala Harris recently said that she would support ending the filibuster to bring back Roe v. Wade. You have said that you believe the filibuster is anti-democratic. You've also used it to advance gun control measures. Do you think the filibuster should be eliminated for Roe v. Wade or other legislation? You have 90 seconds.
Well, let's be clear. A woman's right to decide what she does with her
Topic of abortion, Mr. Murphy, we begin with you. Vice President Kamala Harris recently said that she would support ending the filibuster to bring back Roe v. Wade. You have said that you believe the filibuster is anti-democratic. You've also used it to advance gun control measures. Do you think the filibuster should be eliminated for Roe v. Wade or other legislation? You have 90 seconds.
Well, let's be clear. A woman's right to decide what she does with her own body here in Connecticut is on the ballot this election. I wish that weren't true, but it is. The Republican Party platform calls for a national abortion ban. Let's be honest about what that means. That means here in Connecticut, a young woman could be raped by her family member and be forced to bear that child. I know that doesn't seem possible in Connecticut, but if the Republican Party platform was put into law,
then it would be put into law. And it already is. The overturning of Roe v. Wade did what in Connecticut, Murphy?
Then no one in Connecticut is safe.
No one in Connecticut is safe? Jesus Christ, the rhetoric.
Support is the restoration of Roe versus Wade. Right? The ability of a woman and her doctor to make healthcare decisions, not a politician in Washington. And yes, I would support changing the filibuster so that we can pass that very popular measure with 50 votes. But this election, frankly, is going to decide, likely, whether women in this country and possibly whether women in Connecticut have the right to be able to make their own decisions about their healthcare future. This is
They already do. They already do right now. And the Supreme Court ending Roe v. Wade, all it did was kick it back to the states.
a big decision that the people of Connecticut and the people of this country are making.
Mr. Corey, you have said that you would not support a national abortion ban, but do you believe there are instances such as rape, incest, or the health of the mother where the federal government should step in to protect abortion access in states without those exceptions? You have 90 seconds.
Look, I stand with the people of the state of Connecticut.
Their own decisions about their healthcare future. This is a big decision that the people of Connecticut and the people of this country are making.
Mr. Corey, you have said that you would not support a national abortion ban, but do you believe there are instances such as rape, incest, or the health of the mother where the federal government should step in to protect abortion access in states without those exceptions? You have 90 seconds.
Look, I stand with the people of the state of Connecticut. Senator Murphy wants to use this as a fear tactic. It's unconstitutional. It was brought back to the states. The states need to decide. They've been decided for years. But he says he's so pro-women. When Senator Marsha Blackburn was trying to protect women in sports, he called her a little person. She wanted to protect women in sports because they wanted to recognize women on October 10th, National Women's Day, for their achievements that they made. When Senator Murphy says, I support that, he supports women, that is not true. When the young girls were complaining about men in their bathrooms, in their showers and locker rooms, he shamed them.
Yeah, this is
and so when we asked
It's also
Senator
not
Murphy
answering
back
the
in
question.
2018 about members of Congress during the Me Too movement, of what happened down there in Washington and the names to be released, we have heard silence, and silence is complicity. So you can't say you're pro-women and you want to protect women's rights. So I was just wanting to know why Senator Murphy hasn't been more active on releasing the names of people that are hiding behind a $20 million hush fund in Washington, D.C., and and silencing victims in Washington, D.C. Senator Murphy needs to answer for that. I'm just wondering, Senator Murphy, is anybody in your campaign or yourself ever been accused since you've been an elected official? I mean, if you want to protect women, then be forthright and protect women. But my stance on that
but this
is
also
the
not
states, it's due to the states. The states took control of that. He just wants to fearmonger.
Mr. Murphy, you have 45 seconds to respond to that.
Well, listen, it is just true that in the Republican Party platform is a call for the law to be changed, for a fetus to be treated as a person. And if that is indeed the law, that means that every abortion in this country would be illegal, regardless of whether you live in Connecticut, a blue state, or you live in Texas, a red state. So it is just absolutely true that this is a question in front of the American voters this year. I don't think I'm fear-mongering on this topic. I just think I'm reflecting what the actual Republican Party platform is. I want to make sure that Connecticut families and Connecticut women get to make their own health care decisions, and that's what I'm going to fight for if I'm reelected to the Senate.
Yeah, so we had 4 years of the Republican Party platform. It was Donald Trump, and if you guys are going to call him, a cult, if you're going to say that there's a cult of personality that idol worships him and his views, and that the party runs around Donald Trump has been repeatedly emphatic about the fact that he would not sign into law, he would veto a national abortion ban. And this is just not true. And this is where Corey is actually performing quite poorly. He should point this out. He should call out the claims that are just not true. And instead of spending all of that time with that aside, which I agree with, he should answer the question very quickly and say, just like all other Republicans, I believe that the states that the Supreme Court was decided correctly, and whatever the states decide is what the states decide, and we're not going to have the Fed interfere with that one way or the other, period. This is the Republican Party platform, and especially the Republican Party platform under potentially President Donald Trump. So this is actually a really bad answer from Matt Corey, but this is just a bald-faced lie from Murphy. This is not part of the party platform. It is not true. It's not just a truth. It's an utterly untrue statement. And that's why you hear Corey saying under his breath that it's untrue. And it's like, Corey, you don't say it under your breath. Spend your entire time on that. Every abortion in the country would be illegal? It already isn't. Even in Texas, this isn't the case. Even in states that don't have a time limit on their abortion bans, they already have carve-outs. They already have carve-outs for saving the life of the mother in every single state, and for rape, and I believe certainly for rape, in all but one state. There's one state that doesn't have a carve-out for rape. One. And every single state has an extremely straightforward carve-out for saving the life of the mother. Corey should have spent his entire time on that. This is just an utterly untrue claim from Murphy.
Mr. Corey, 45 seconds to respond.
And they do. The state of Connecticut's law is what it is, and they do. So Senator Murphy wants to fearmonger in this election because that's what they do in Washington. They send fear through you. People are going to be dictators. It's just, this is what, when you're down in Washington that long, that's what you do. You bring that home and you scare your constituents. The law is settled in the state of Connecticut. I stand by the law in the state of Connecticut. The Republican Party's platform, it's already said they will veto any national abortion ban. That is the truth.
All right, we're going to move on to our next topic. Thank you, gentlemen. Dennis?
Catherine, turning to transgender rights, Connecticut has been in the national spotlight regarding the rights of transgender students to compete in sports. Mr. Corey, you have said, if elected, you would be a senator similar to Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, who introduced a bill which would, quote, ban federal funding for schools that permit a male to participate in a women's sports event. Would you support that legislation? You have 90 seconds.
I absolutely would support.
Question. Would you support a bill would withdraw funding from a school allowed a male to participate in women's sports? Corey. I absolutely would. This is how you should be answering questions like this. WTNH is asking very difficult, but I think very even-handed and fair questions. So unbelievable credit to WTNH. I was not expecting this from their moderators. I was not expecting this from their question panel. Really well done on their part. Really well done on their part. But Corey, like, if you want to have success, this is how you have to answer these questions.
That. When are men in this country going to start standing up for women's rights? Why should women suffer? Now, Senator Murphy wants to call us little people and bullies. This is just the wrong rhetoric. Nobody wants, and you see around the country, women are trying to stand up for what they believe in. Why should we wipe out the achievements, the scholarships, records? Right here in Connecticut, how many records were wiped out? How many scholarships were broken? We have women that don't even want to compete in sports because they have to compete against a male. They don't want to get hurt. They don't want to get injured. Yes, I would stand by that bill. But once again, when are men in this country going to start standing up for women?
Mr. Murphy, you recently championed the rights of transgender athletes on the Senate floor. What do you say to voters who think those athletes have an unfair advantage?
This is so good. This is so good. This is brilliant. I got to give WTNH credit. I was not expecting this high quality of debate and moderation.
You have 90 seconds.
Well, what I said in that speech is that it should be up to every individual community, every individual board of education to make that decision. I don't think the federal government should be setting the policy for women's, men's, boys, girls sports here in Connecticut. But listen, I do have a problem with Republican politicians who spend an outsized amount of time focused on an issue that matters to very few voters compared to the importance of issues like the economy.
So how about abortion in the case of, instances where you're talking about saving the mother's life? Because that is a very, we're talking 1 to 10 women a year at most. At most. How, okay, are we going to do that? Are we going to play that game?
Like choice, like the cost of healthcare. I do think that there is a campaign of fear underway in this country, led by people like Ron DeSantis, to try to bully and marginalize gay and transgender children, to make us all believe that we have something to fear from people or children whose sexual orientation is different from us. There's an epidemic of suicide and self-harm in this country amongst our gay students and transgender students. And it often happens because they are made to feel ostracized by the communities in which they live, because there are federal politicians going around pretending like the biggest problem facing this country is whether or not transgender girls get to participate in sports or not. I'm not saying that that isn't a legitimate issue for some communities, but they should be able to decide that for themselves instead of having the policy be set at a federal level. I really do worry about the health of our gay children, our transgender children. I do think the impact of this rhetoric is serious on them.
Thank you.
And I want us to focus on problems that really matter to everybody in this country.
Thank you, gentlemen. Catherine?
Now to the future of Connecticut, our next topic. In a recent Next Star poll of 5th District voters, 53% think Connecticut is moving in the wrong direction. Mr. Murphy, you served the 5th District for 6 years. You've been in the Senate for the last 12.
What?
For voters looking for a change.
That is really cool.
Problems that really matter to everybody in this country.
Thank you, gentlemen. Catherine?
Now to the future of Connecticut, our next topic. In a recent Next Star poll of 5th District voters, 53% think Connecticut is moving in the wrong direction. Mr. Murphy, you served the 5th District for 6 years. You've been in the Senate for the last 12. For voters looking for a change, would you do anything different this time around if reelected? You have 90 seconds.
So listen, I think people are hurting in this country. And the economy is much better. If you want a job, you can get it. Factory construction is up. Crime is going down. But people feel powerless in this country, even people that are working. And that's because the structure of this economy is broken. These corporations, these billionaires, they have far too much power, and people have less than ever before. So what I think we need to do as a country is to take on corporate and consolidated power, to break up some of these quasi-monopolies, to go after the technology companies that are harming our kids on a daily basis, getting them addicted to these screens. So yes, I think the economy is improving here in Connecticut. We've won back all of the jobs and created more since the pandemic. But I do think that there's a real mismatch between the amount of power that economic elites have in this country and the amount of power that regular people have in this country. That's why I've supported President Biden's efforts to take on the big corporations, to support labor unions, to give tax cuts to people who really need them. And it's why I'm so upset about his policies, which seem to be, just reinforcing the power that these big companies have. He said to the oil companies, if you give my campaign $1 billion, I'll give you whatever you want in my administration. That means more power for the oil industry, higher prices for consumers. That's why I've supported President Biden's efforts to take on the big corporations, to support labor unions, to give tax cuts to people who really need them. And it's why I'm so upset about his policies, which seem to be, just reinforcing the power that these big companies have. He said to the oil companies, if you give my campaign $1 billion, I'll give you whatever you want in my administration. That means more power for the oil industry, higher prices for consumers. That's certainly not what we need in Connecticut.
Mr. Corey, Connecticut has not elected a Republican to the Senate in 42 years. This is also a state.
Time out. Is that what he's really saying? That the sitting president said that? Really? Would that be a violation of the emoluments clause based on how you voted when Donald Trump had that impeachment trial? Really?
Former President Trump lost by 20 points in 2020. For voters who want something different but do not support the former president, name specific ways you differ from him. You have 90 seconds.
Look, there's not many ways. I mean, I have a better personality than he has, but look, these tax cuts that Senator Murphy, because he's never owned a business, never worked in the private sector, doesn't understand how the economy works. What he's telling the voters of Connecticut, don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe that Aetna's shutting down 2,900 jobs around the country. Don't believe the bankruptcies and all these hospitality businesses. Don't believe the small restaurants that are closing down. Those Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, what Senator Murphy wants to get rid of, will increase your income tax, will increase small business tax, will increase your capital gains tax, will increase your estimated gains tax. This is the tax policies just do not create jobs. We need to lower the tax structure. We need to make sure that people have work. Trillions and trillions of dollars were repatriated back under the past administration. The jobs that Senator Murphy talks about are the jobs that were created after COVID, that were lost. And a lot of these small businesses never opened up because of the massive shutdowns. I'm in the hospitality business. There's people around Connecticut could tell you a mom and a pop business in their neighborhood that's closed down after 25, 30 years with all the mandates and regulations. Senator Murphy doesn't understand any of that. You go through the city of Hartford, 3/4 of the buildings are in foreclosure. Jobs are being lost every single day in the state of Connecticut. We used to be, once again, the beacon light of New England. Senator Murphy doesn't understand that because he's never worked in the private sector. He wants to blame large corporations. It's not the fact.
Mr. Murphy, I'm going to give you 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah, listen, I understand Mr. Corey's enthusiasm for Donald Trump's tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires and corporations. It's because he believes what most Republicans believe, that money will eventually trickle down to everybody else. But that's never, ever how it's worked. And, the good news is that we have evidence to compare the economy under Donald Trump to the economy under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We lost jobs over the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
If you cherry
We've never
pick
created
the
more
points.
jobs than we've created in the 4-year period of time that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been in charge. We lost 170,000 manufacturing jobs when Donald Trump was president. We've created never, ever how it's.
Yeah, I'm not even taking notes on this. This is
I understand
so
Mr. Corey's enthusiasm for Donald Trump's tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires,
which affected way more than millionaires and billionaires. And in fact, the people that it hurt the most, if the handful of people who didn't get a tax cut were millionaires and billionaires, right? Like I got that tax cut. Am I a millionaire? Am I a billionaire? No. It was the single biggest tax cut for the working man since like the Reagan administration.
Corporations. It's because he believes what most Republicans believe, that money will eventually trickle down to everybody else. But that
no, it doesn't. Oh my God. He did the trickle down. Down. All right. I got to pull something off the shelf. You guys are gonna love this. Oh, you guys are going to love this. Here it comes. Notice how Corey has never even mentioned the words trickle or down, right? So let me bring up the main screen so you guys can see this. Okay. This is trickle down theory and tax cuts for the rich. Notice the use of scare quotes, right? We got scare quotes here. So I read this on my channel, Mike Reads. We could probably pull up the video. We could probably just watch it at double speed because the whole book is a whopping 13 pages. Senator Murphy, read this damn book. Read this book. Trickle down theory and tax cuts for the rich is a straw man that was created in the 1920s by the yellow press, by the very far left and openly socialistic far press. It was a straw man for the supply side economics tactics that Presidents Harding and then Coolidge correctly used to respond to the market crash of 1920 to 1921. This was a deeper crash than the market crash of October 29, right? Like the 1929 crash was not as severe in terms of the actual crash as, relatively speaking, as the 1920 crash. Why do we never hear about the 1920 recession? Because it was over with in like 8 months. It was done and over with in like 8 months. And that was because Harding and Coolidge got out of the way and allowed it to recover, which it did on its own, of its own volition. This trickle-down theory and this whole idea of tax cuts for the rich is a straw man. This is a straw man and usually espoused by people who are either liars or have a not even middle school understanding of economics, right? Like, here's the thing, it's time and soul, right? So we're going to get, pages and pages and pages of citations on a 13-page pamphlet, right? Like there's almost as many pages devoted to citations as the actual content of the pamphlet. He is not wrong. Thomas Sowell is not wrong, and he evidences it, to the order of, again, 57 citations for 13 pages of content. Again, that's on my channel, Mike Reads. So yeah, link to my Mike Reads channel in this video's description. What a terrible. I mean, this is failing the litmus test at such a ridiculous extent. I don't know how to properly respond to it if I'm being honest.
That's never ever how it's worked, and
it's never ever how it's worked because nobody has ever espoused this idea. Nobody has ever espoused this idea.
That we have evidence to compare the economy under Donald Trump to the economy under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
If you cherry pick the starting dates. Oh my God, I have to do this. So this gets brought up a ton. This gets brought up a ton. I'm going to have to do this. I don't know how the best way to do this, but we're going to do it. On desktop, new folder 2. I think it's the last one. Let's go to, let's do this. Can you guys see that? This keeps getting brought up. We can cherry pick the date, right? So you can see, here's what happened. COVID. We had this excellent growth rate, right? And that's what's in this red here under Trump. And then we had COVID, and COVID had the V-shaped recovery under Trump. And then right here, that's when the inauguration took place. And then everything flattens out. Everything flattens out. This is the Dow. Yeah, the left will keep bringing this up, that the Dow reached a new peak, and it had this excellent growth recovery. Because if you cherry pick this point and this point, then yeah, there's not a whole lot of growth over from here to here because of this supposed pandemic. If it's not a pandemic, then say it's not a pandemic. But if it's a pandemic, then it's a pandemic, and you have to treat it as such. And in the meantime, Trump had this excellent recovery, this incredibly steep recovery. And if we had just taken this Trump, because this is how I made this graph. This is how I made this graphic, right? I just took this line and copied it and pasted it in different colors. So if we never had COVID, this is what we would have expected for 4 more years of Trump in the pink. And if we did have COVID and Trump got reelected, what you would expect is this orange line. Look at the difference between this orange line and this blue line, right? I gotta figure out where the heck we were now. This one.
We lost jobs over the 4 years that Donald Trump.
If you're cherry picking the dates, yes.
Trump was president. We've never created more jobs than we've created in the 4-year period.
Jobs recovered is not jobs created.
Of time that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been in charge.
Jobs created is not jobs recovered are not jobs created. Okay, there were no net jobs created until late 2023. That's when we finally broke even. That is when we finally broke even. And the jobs reporting, every month that it's been reported, has been well short of expectations, and in almost every month since then has had to be, corrected after the fact downward, which includes, I think it was December 23. There was a month that was by a mile the largest correction in the history of these corrections, by orders of magnitude the largest correction, and it was downward. The most recent jobs report, Chris, if you're going to hang your hat on this, was 12,000 jobs. 12,000 jobs compared to a 100,000 job expectation. That is a preposterously awful performance.
We lost 170,000 manufacturing jobs when Donald Trump was president.
Why? Why did that happen? Could it possibly be that the governor who your party the governor who is a Democrat, who your party allowed, I think it was 8 extensions of emergency executive authority? 8 of them, right? This went on for years, that the legislature under Democrat supermajority abdicated its duty and handed over to somebody who had the authority of a literal monarch for all intents and purposes for years. For years. Could it be that by the whim of his hand and by the whim of the stroke of his pen, these people were not allowed to go back to work? Could it be that? Could it be your party, the supermajority party in the Senate and the near supermajority party in the House here in Connecticut forced those shutdowns? Could it have been that? And if it wasn't that, then can we talk about whether or not what we're talking about is a pandemic? Because if it's not, then it's not. Say it. But if it's a pandemic, then you have to treat it as one.
We've created over 700,000 manufacturing jobs just in the last 3.5 years.
And so
I get it that there's a group of people that think if you give tax cuts to the wealthy, it'll get down to the poor. It just has never worked that way.
Mr. Court, I want to give you 45 seconds.
There are no people.
He can project whatever he wants. We lost 150,000 manufacturing jobs this year alone. All you have to do is ask yourself, and this will be a short 45 seconds, are you better off today than you were 4, or in case of Senator Murphy, 6 years ago. What he's trying to tell you is, don't believe the job losses. Don't believe the companies that are closing down. And these are under the tax policies that he embraces. And you're going to get another 4 years of that. The same thing, more taxes, more spending. At $35 trillion in debt, we spent over $1 trillion in interest rates alone. Just think about that. Just think about that $1 trillion that could have went to all these construction jobs here in Connecticut, good union jobs that could have built our roads, our bridges, our highways. He's not talking about that because he doesn't understand the private sector.
We're going to move on to our next topic. Thank you, gentlemen. Dennis.
Catherine, there has been a lot of response to comments made at a Trump rally in New York on Sunday. Mr. Corey, you were at that rally when a comedian called Puerto Rico, quote, a floating island of garbage. Puerto Ricans make up the largest portion of the Hispanic population in our state. The Trump campaign has said that comment does not reflect the views of the former president. What is your response to the hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans in Connecticut?
Look, I agree with the former president. It doesn't reflect us. I wasn't in the rally when that happened. I was standing in line. I didn't have the privilege to be in there. But what is really at stake here is jobs and opportunity. This is what sometimes the media does and sometimes the senator does. It's diffusing from failed policies. Let's look at Puerto Rico in itself. During the 1990s, when President Bill Clinton was in power, they got rid of the corporate tax cuts that they had.
All right, I want to hold on.
Now they didn't have the privilege to be in there.
Island of garbage. Puerto Rico.
So I want to talk about the strategy that he's employing in answering this question, because it's actually a really good strategy.
Ricans make up the largest portion of the Hispanic population in our state. The Trump campaign has said that comment does not reflect the views of the former president. What is your response to the hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans in Connecticut?
Look, I agree with the former president. It doesn't reflect us. I wasn't in the rally when that happened. I was standing in line. I didn't have the privilege to be in there. But what is really at stake here?
Pause. So that's his answer to the question. He's got what, like 3 minutes to answer this? He's got I don't know how long he actually has, because I forget the debate rules. But he answers the question in 5 seconds. And then he's going to move on, right? Because this is a silly question, right? And when you were presented with a silly question like this, just bam, blast out the answer real quick and then move on, right? Because there's no point in wasting your time on this question.
Is jobs and opportunity. This is what sometimes the media does and sometimes the senator does. It's diffusing from failed policies. Let's look at Puerto Rico in itself. During the 1990s, when President Bill Clinton was in power, they got rid of the corporate tax cuts that they had down there. Now they made the corporate tax rates as just as competitive, not just the same as here in the United States. And what happened to Puerto Rico in the 90s? Well, Senator Murphy was going through growing pains. I visited San Juan coming back from the Middle East. That was a booming place. Everybody was working. Because they went back and didn't keep those corporate tax rates cut, all those manufacturing jobs have left Puerto Rico. All the youth have fled Puerto Rico and came to states like Connecticut. And what was left? Some corruption in the government, and you had left the elderly people behind. There's no job opportunities, or not as much as there were in the 1980s when I was there. So we are talking about jobs. If you want to talk about distractions, yes, we love our Puerto Rican community. I was a minority in my own company for 32 years. Wonderful people, hardworking people. Those statements from that comedian does not represent all the Republicans that want to fight for jobs for not only just Puerto Ricans, but for everybody in the state of Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. And Mr. Murphy, in response to those comments on Sunday, President Biden said, quote, the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. Late today, Vice President Harris said she strongly disagrees with any criticism of people based on who they vote for. More than 700,000 Connecticut residents supported President Trump in 2020. What do you say to them?
Well, let's just be clear. The media isn't overhyping what Republicans are saying right now, right? In that rally,
what?
One of Trump's supporters called Puerto Rico
what?
Who they vote for. More than 700,000 Connecticut residents supported President Trump in 2020. What do you say to them?
Well, let's just be clear. The media isn't overhyping what Republicans are saying right now, right? In that rally, one of Trump's supporters called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. President Trump hasn't distanced himself from that comment. He hasn't criticized that comment.
What?
Why? Because he himself has run a campaign trying to make us deathly afraid of people who are coming to this country to see.
What? He disavowed that comment at that rally. At that rally. This is what a gaslight.
The media isn't overhyping what Republicans are saying right now, right? In that rally, one of Trump's supporters called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. President Trump hasn't distanced himself from that comment. He hasn't criticized that comment. Why? Because he himself has ran a campaign trying to make us deathly afraid of people who are coming to this country to seek a better life. This narrative that Haitian immigrants are eating pets, his rhetoric that immigrants to this country are vermin, and this is really disgusting. Deathly afraid of himself from that comment. He hasn't criticized that comment. Why? Because he himself has ran a campaign trying to make us deathly afraid of people who are coming to this country to seek a better life. This narrative that Haitian immigrants are eating pets, his rhetoric that immigrants to this country are vermin, and this is really disgusting. It is hateful. It's not the America that I recognize. What I think of America is a country that is made stronger by our immigrant communities. And I just, really worry that President Trump himself has refused to distance himself from these comments. What I, heard President Biden say was in reference to the rhetoric, not to the individuals. And listen, I'll just be clear. I represent everybody in this state. You're right. There are a lot of people in Connecticut who support Donald Trump and who are going to support Donald Trump. And I'm going to listen to them and care about them and fight for them just as hard as I'm going to listen to and fight for people who supported Kamala Harris. That's my job as a United States Senator. And I think I've lived that ethic. I've reached out across the aisle and been able to build bipartisan support for immigration reform, for gun violence reform. I'll continue to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Carr, I'll give you 45 seconds to respond.
Look, what he says is not true. Just coming from the Democratic Party itself. Looking at Trump supporters, looking at the president, calling him a dictator, comparing that rally to a Nazi rally in 1939, the same television station that Senator Murphy's on 24/7 in Washington, D.C. He hasn't condemned MSNBC for that. He hasn't. So I don't know what rhetoric he's talking about, but the rhetoric coming from the Democratic Party is just as bad, if not worse. Look, we're looking for somebody that wants to go to Washington, not use it as their personal playground to be vindictive. You need a senator down in Washington that wants to work for the people, work on issues that are facing everybody every day, which is affordability, better health.
I understand. So this is a direct quote from Donald Trump the day after this took place in an interview. Yeah. This is from The Hill. Quote, I understand his Kill Tony podcast is wildly popular, but I thought he was unfunny and unfortunately offended many of our friends from Puerto Rico. Oh, no, sorry. That was David Urban from the Trump campaign. Yeah. I mean, did you guys watch that rally? Because I did. And as soon as Hinchcliffe went off the set and it was Trump's time to come to the podium, the first thing he did was say, yeah, no, I disavow that. LA Times, even Trump backers running from Tony Hinchcliffe's racist jokes. Yeah, he disavowed this at that rally. Yeah, here, let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I can find video.
With 1 week left in the race.
Oh, man. So we're not going to get the actual audio here? Trump told ABC News he hasn't watched the comedian's comments, insisting he doesn't know him. Someone put him up there. I don't know who he is. Yeah. Okay. This is just an open lie. This is just an open lie.
Healthcare. Going to the grocery store, you're not choosing between heat and prescription drugs.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Mr. Murphy, I'll give you 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah, this isn't my words. This is President Trump's words. President Trump has actually...
Democratic Party itself.
For them, just as hard as I'm going to listen to and fight for people who supported Kamala Harris. That's my job as a United States Senator, and I think I've lived that ethic. I've reached out across the aisle and been able to build bipartisan support for immigration reform, for gun violence reform. I'll continue to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Carr, I'll give you 45 seconds to respond.
Look, what he says is not true. Just coming from the Democratic Party itself, looking at Trump supporters, looking at the president, calling him a dictator, comparing that rally to a Nazi rally in 1939, the same television station that Senator Murphy's on 24/7 in Washington, D.C. He hasn't condemned MSNBC for that. He hasn't. So I don't know what rhetoric he's talking about, but the rhetoric coming from the Democratic Party is just as bad, if not worse. Look, we're looking for somebody that wants to go to Washington, not use it as their personal playground to be vindictive. You need a senator down in Washington that wants to work for the people, work on issues that are facing everybody every day, which is affordability, better health care, going to the grocery store, you're not choosing between heat and prescription drugs.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Mr. Murphy, I'll give you 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah, this isn't my words. This is President Trump's words. President Trump has actually said that he'll be a dictator on the day that he is sworn in. He has said repeatedly that he believes that there is an enemy within America that is more dangerous than external enemies. And when asked who that enemy within is, he says Democrats. He named some of my future colleagues in the United States Senate. That does seem really dangerous to me when Donald Trump is saying that he would use the army to try to deal with the enemy from within, and he says the enemy from within are Democrats. That doesn't sound like democracy to me. So I don't think that we're engaging in hyperbole when we suggest that President Trump is talking about some real dangerous
they need to allow him
threats
to
to
respond.
democracy if he's elected.
They have to allow
Thank you,
him to
gentlemen.
respond.
Catherine.
We are turning now to safety.
Wow. Okay, Corey, if you get a chance, answer the question in like 6 words, the next question you get, and then you got to come back to this. Because when Donald Trump joked that he would only be a dictator on day one, and only on day one, not just on day one, because we know what that means. We know that by phrasing it that way, you're implying, obviously, that he means starting on day one and continuing forward. No. This was a joke. The difference between a joke and a literalism is that a literalism is to be taken literally, and a joke is to be taken as a joke, which means without perfect sincerity. This is so bad. This is a disgusting lie. This is a disgusting gaslight. He said there was an enemy within the U.S. Yes, there is. Yeah. We need to look at the enemy within. There is. Right. And the enemy to truth, which is what he was talking about. He was talking specifically about the enemy to the truth, which he laid out in that sentence. That there is an enemy within the system to the truth. Dickhead. Like, what a slime ball. What an utter slime ball. Use the army to deal with the enemy from... No, he was talking about intelligence sources. Oh, my God. Corey, when you get in a situation like this, you have to just like bite the bullet, and whatever question they ask you next, get it out, done and over with in 6 seconds and come back to this, because this is disgraceful. Like the rhetoric from Joe Biden, in that infamous, and I say infamous because it wasn't just famous, but infamous speech in front of the White House with the red lit background. Yeah. That looked more like a Nazi rally than anything Donald Trump's ever done. If we're going to focus on affectation rather than content, right? I've never heard anything more divisive. Never heard it. The mainstream media and the Democratic Party as a whole have nonstop treated come out in many cases and said that Donald Trump is literal Orange Hitler, that his followers are literal Nazis. The characterization is straightforward, and it's so bad that it bled down to the local DTC leadership here in New Milford in 2021. And in 2021, they painted at least half of New Milford voters, and in fact, really more like 2/3 of New Milfordites, as literal Nazis. And then doubled down on it, refused to apologize for it, and to this day insists that, hey, it's just politics at best. That's the best response you're going to get for them. They've uniformly, and every opportunity they get to mention him, they refer to Donald Trump as the single greatest threat to the U.S., to the Republic, to democracy in all of American history. He is a singular threat to the American public. What the flying F is that supposed to... Like, what the hell are you supposed to do with that? Like, if he's literal Orange Hitler and is a singular threat, and you keep telling people that he wants to literally a genocide millions of innocent Americans, that he wants to put into camps literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of American citizens. If he's going to overturn and overthrow democracy and completely upend the Republic for a literal genocidal dictatorship, what is the actual response to that? What should you do? If you're put into a DeLorean with a working flux capacitor with a rifle, right? And you're time traveled all the way back to 1939, and you've got some invincibility bubble, right? You've got some invincibility bubble that allows you to just pull the trigger and not have to worry about it. Are you assassinating Adolf Hitler? What if Adolf Hitler just painted his face orange? Are you assassinating literal Orange Hitler in that situation? Why do you think there's been no assassination attempts on Biden? Why do you think there's been no assassination attempts on Kamala Harris? And there's been two on Donald Trump just this year. Why do you think that's the case? Could it possibly be this rhetoric? Because if you genuinely believe this characterization of Donald Trump and his followers, then you should be doing, well, I can't be too specific here on YouTube because it'll be taken out of context. But if you genuinely believe it, it logically follows, the assassination logically follows from that logic, from that characterization, if you actually believe it. And this has not been said as jokes. This has not been said with, some air of insincerity. This has been said with total sincerity, nonstop for 8 years. So, you know what, Chris? If you see this video, my response to all of this is fucking spare me. Fucking spare me.
In schools where school shootings continue to make headlines. Mr. Murphy, you have introduced legislation to remove school resource officers from schools. There are examples of these officers saving lives, and most recently in Appalachia, Georgia. Does removing a trained armed officer make schools safer? You have...
Wow. Does removing, hold on, this is a brutal question.
Introduced legislation to remove school resource officers from schools. There are examples of these officers saving lives, and most recently in Appalachia, Georgia. Does removing a trained armed officer make schools safer? You have 90 seconds.
Well, I actually haven't introduced legislation to remove school resource officers. I've introduced legislation to direct federal funding towards social workers and psychologists that I think are very badly needed. I actually think it should be up to every individual school district as to whether they have armed officers, and I support their decisions when they choose to bring those security personnel into the schools. What I'm proud of is
safer. You have 90 seconds.
Well, I actually haven't introduced legislation to remove school resource officers. I've introduced legislation to direct federal funding towards social workers and psychologists that I think are very badly needed. I actually think it should be up to every individual school district as to whether they have armed officers, and I support their decisions when they choose to bring those security personnel into the schools. What I'm proud legislation to remove school resource officers. I've introduced legislation to direct federal funding towards social workers and psychologists that I think are very badly needed. I actually think it should be up to every individual school district as to whether they have armed officers, and I support their decisions when they choose to bring those security personnel into the schools. What I'm proud of is the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. For 30 years, we had no action in Washington protecting our kids. And 2 years ago, I brought together Republicans and Democrats to pass the first significant anti-gun violence bill in 3 decades. That bill included some significant and important changes to gun laws, but it also involved security funds for our schools to help schools make investment in hardening their infrastructure. It included money for anti-violence initiatives in our cities to try to interrupt the cycle of violence. And you know what's happened since we passed that bill, a bill that was opposed by Donald Trump and most Republicans, thankfully supported by enough Republicans to get it passed? We've seen urban gun violence in this country drop by 20%. And this year, we have had 25% fewer mass shootings. Now, I'm not going to rest until every single kid in this country is safe, until we have no threats to our children when they walk into schools.
That's
but I'm deeply proud of the progress that we have made, the way I've been able to bring Republicans and Democrats together around these common sense gun safety initiatives.
Mr. Corey, you have called for more school resources.
I want to know what he means by no threats. Because risk, there is no such thing as zero risk. That's just how risk works. This is an unbelievably dumb... It's either he means something else by this. And if that's the case, then he should say that. If the standard is no threats, then I think what he means is no guns. That seems to be the way he's at least spoken and legislated when it comes to firearms. It's just a complete elimination of them within the private sector. A complete elimination of it. And by the way, the directing of federal funding towards social workers and psychologists away from SROs, right? And an act that she's referring to would have defunded schools that tried to bring in their own SROs. Right? Like, you got to be kidding me. What is the difference then? If you're pulling back the mechanism for funding the thing, what is the difference between eliminating the thing?
Resource officers as a solution to the problem. Do you support going as far as arming teachers? You have 90 seconds.
Look, it depends on what district you live in around the country. Look, if there's trained military people, if they're former police officers, I don't have a problem with that. Look, that's up to the communities itself. Whatever school districts want to make up that mind. But let's make no mistake. Senator Murphy has said publicly he wants to remove school resource officers, despite what he says. Because in the last debate we had in 2018, he said, "I'll leave it up to the districts." Once again, he goes back to Washington. He wants to remove them for whatever reason. I don't know. But this is what happens when you defund the police. You have the top of the ticket who wants to defund ICE. We need to support our law enforcement. And despite what Senator Murphy says, there's gun crime all over the cities. Because of why? There's no opportunities. East Haven police officers were getting shot.
Oh, yeah, hold on. So Safer Communities Act was a bipartisan anti-gun violence bill that resulted in urban gun violence dropping by 20%. No, what happened is you had a gigantic COVID spike in those urban communities, and then you had a decline because of that spike.
Shot at. Woodbury police officer got stabbed in the neck. There was just a shooting at a Bridgeport school. Our police officers are being attacked every day because the policies that are coming out of this administration and Senator Murphy, who embraces this administration, is soft on crime. Catch and release doesn't work. People are walking back in the streets, and our police are handcuffed. All you have to do is look in New York City. 75% of the arrests are from illegal immigrants. Senator Murphy's going to tell you one thing, but once again, he says, don't believe what you're seeing in the streets. Don't believe what the news is telling you. Let's believe the FBI statistics that are telling me a different story in Washington.
Oh,
Mr.
yeah.
Murphy, I'm going to give you 45 seconds to respond.
Oh, yeah. Corey, you got to bring up reporting. You got to bring up reporting because the way that a lot of these cities are doing their reporting has completely changed. And a lot of these cities are utterly refusing to work with the FBI when it comes to their reporting. So this is accounting for like huge unrealistic dips in certain areas and things like armed burglary. Like there are cities where you're going from like, you know, let's say at 500 to 0. That's just not happening. That's not happening in 1 year. No, what's happening is they're refusing to cooperate with the FBI and reporting their data.
Yeah, listen, I'm not saying that there aren't still heinous crimes being committed, but it is true that crime is coming down in this country. It is true that there is...
From a spike that happened in response to the BLM riots and the short-term policies that greatly affected the cities that actually instituted them.
Significantly less urban gun crime. In Hartford this year, we're on pace to have a 50% reduction in gun crime. So I don't know why we'd want to go back. Donald Trump says that he wants to eliminate all the progress we've made on tightening our gun laws on the first day that he's in office. That would be a disaster for us.
That's not true.
And I would just encourage Mr. Corey to go talk to teachers in Connecticut, to go talk to students. Ask them if they want guns in our schools, in teachers' desks, on teachers' waistbands. Kids and teachers in this state do not want our teachers armed. Let me be clear about that.
Mr. Corey,
I never said that. Once again, he's misconstruing what I said. I said certain parts of the country may allow that. This is up to the school districts here in Connecticut. As a matter of fact, I was in a school system just the other day, Senator, and they were very happy the school resource officers are in there. They're very important in our school systems. They prevent child predators on the internet. They keep kids off drugs. And it's a place for kids to go to when they can't go to a teacher or a parent. We need to support our law enforcement in this state and around the country. And we don't see that coming from this administration when they say they want to defund police. As a matter of fact, Senator Murphy's endorsed by the Working Families Party, who wants to defund the police. If he wasn't so, if he said he didn't want to defund the police, why did he accept that endorsement from the Working Families Party?
Thank you both. We're going to move on to our next topic. Dennis.
Catherine, our next subject, social media. The U.S. Surgeon General blames social media as an important contributor in the mental health crisis among young people. Mr. Corey, would you support age restrictions on children using social media? You have 90 seconds.
Look, this is a parent's decision. We want to make sure kids don't go on certain internet sites. That's a family issue. I don't think there needs to be federal law to restrict people from seeing that type of internet restriction, but that would be a family decision. I wouldn't want people, young kids, having access to anything that's harmful to them. I'm not talking about any time constraints on any kids, but look, that's a parent's decision.
Mr. Murphy, would you consider age restrictions for social media accounts? 90 seconds, please.
Yeah, I'm a parent of a teenager and a preteen. The parents I talk to in Connecticut want help. I think this algorithm that perfects content for kids, that ropes them into addiction, I really think it's a poison. I do. And I think it should be turned off for kids under 18. I don't think we should allow kids under 13 onto social media. And I actually think that parents should be allowed to consent before their children join these social media sites. I think what's happening in this country is really, really dangerous. I do. And I think it should be turned off for kids under 18. I don't think we should allow kids under 13 onto social media. And I actually think that parents should be allowed to consent before their children join these social media sites. I think what's happening in this country is really, really dangerous. If you look at the amount of time kids spend with friends, it's half as much today as it was 20 years ago. And so it's not a coincidence that our kids are in increasing mental health crisis today, that suicide rates amongst teenagers are increasing. So yes, I think we should step in and we should keep these kids off of social media until they are 13. And I think we should give parents the right, the ability to consent. I think parents are crying out for those tools. And I don't think it's right for the government just to step back and give parents nothing in the way of help. I think they desperately want that help right now.
Thank you, gentlemen.
We are now, we have just a few short minutes left.
So although social media is basically the greatest scourge of this generation, Corey's right on this one. This is a family issue. You know, if you're a good parent, you aren't giving your kid a phone until they're at least old enough to drive. If you're a good parent, you're keeping your kids off social media at all costs. If you're a good parent, you're keeping track of where your kid is and what they're doing. And then beyond that, if they go to extraordinary lengths to work around you, well then, you know, congratulations on their ingenuity at that point, right? This is a family issue. I'm sorry. Corey's 100% right on this one.
So we want to get to a lightning.
And we all know what this is. This is really just a way to get Twitter destroyed now that Elon's in charge.
Round of questions. Please keep your answers brief. Mr. Corey, we begin with you. Do you own a gun, and what type?
I do. I own a few guns. There's sporting rifles, and I also own hunting rifles. I enjoy that.
Mr. Murphy, do you own a gun, and if so, what type?
I don't, but I support every law-abiding citizen's right to own a gun, and I'll continue to do that.
Mr. Murphy, do you tip on a takeout order?
I do tip on.
Thank you, gentlemen.
We are now, we have just a few short minutes left, so we want to get to a lightning round of questions. Please keep your answers brief. Mr. Corey, we begin with you. Do you own a gun, and what type?
I do. I own a few guns. There's sporting rifles, and I also own hunting rifles. I enjoy that.
Mr. Murphy, do you own a gun, and if so, what type?
I don't, but I support every law-abiding citizen's right to own a gun, and I'll continue to do that.
Mr. Murphy, do you tip on a takeout order?
I do tip on most takeout orders.
Mr. Corey.
I'm in the hospitality business. Of course I do.
Mr. Corey, have you used cannabis since it's become legal in Connecticut?
Not a big fan, no.
Okay. Mr. Murphy, same question. Have you used cannabis since it's become legal?
Similar, not a big fan.
Mr. Murphy, name a senator from the opposite party you respect. Mr. Corey.
I'm in the hospital, and I also own hunting rifles.
Right,
I enjoy that.
Too fast. I can't take notes on
Mr.
this.
Murphy, do you own a gun, and if so, what type?
I don't, but I support every law-abiding citizen's right to own a gun, and I'll continue to do that.
Mr. Murphy, do you tip on a takeout order?
Shit.
I do tip on most takeout orders.
Mr. Corey.
I'm in the hospitality business. Of course I do.
Mr. Corey, have you used cannabis since it's become legal in Connecticut?
Not a big fan, no.
Okay. Mr. Murphy, same question. Have you used cannabis since it's become legal?
Similar, not a big fan.
Mr. Murphy, name a senator from the opposite party you respect.
Todd Young of Indiana, John Cornyn of Texas, James Lankford of Oklahoma. Those are the senators that I've worked with to pass bipartisan gun reform, bipartisan immigration reform. I'm lucky that I have a lot of friends on the Republican side that are willing to work on bipartisan legislation. I'm certainly going to continue that in my second term.
Mr. Corey, name a senator from the opposite party you respect.
Look, unfortunately, he passed away. He was one of the most bipartisan senators, Senator Joseph Lieberman.
Thank you, gentlemen. We want to get to your closing statements now.
That
You
was
each
a
have
dodge.
30 seconds. Mr. Corey, we begin with you.
That time out.
Change began.
That was. I love the look on Murphy's face because that was such a fucking dodge. Joseph Lieberman hasn't been a fucking senator in like 20 years. When was Joe Lieberman last a senator? I gotta look this up. In office, 2013? It's been 11 years since he was in office. 11 freaking years. I actually love it. I love it because he knows this can't be a serious question. I actually love it. I love it because he knows that like there's one side of the political aisle that allows for heterodoxy and there's one that just doesn't. Right? And that's why that there are Republicans that, span, the political spectrum that have difference in opinions from the rest of the party. And it just isn't there for the other party. Right? So he knows it. He knows that the answer is no one. They're all radicals. They're all really far left radicals. Every single senator on the Democrat ticket today. Every single one. Right? And there's an incredibly narrow window, Overton window. And because of that, they all have to fit in that incredibly narrow Overton window. Remember what I said about how they don't allow heterodoxy? So this is a great answer. He must have just had this one prepared. Because, I love the look on Murphy's face, realizing that this is just a dodge, a way of avoiding saying, you guys are all psycho. Oh, man, that's brilliant.
Begins with a vote. We see the economy, we see an open border, and we see wars around the world. As a United States Navy veteran, I want to make sure our military men and women don't have to serve in dangerous areas because we want to bring peace. If you want change in Washington, it starts with your vote, and you can't have change if you send the same people back to Washington. I'm here, I'm a small business owner, I care about the people that work for me, I care about the community. That's who I want to represent in Washington, D.C., making sure your life is a better place to live.
Mr. Corey, thank you. Mr. Murphy, you have 30 seconds.
Well, enjoyed this debate. I think most people know that I spend a week every year walking across the state, and I do that because I want to better understand what I need to be fighting for on their behalf. But I also do it because I love this job, I do, and I want to show people that I don't take it for granted, that I'm willing to do exceptional things to show gratitude to the people of this state who have given me this chance. And so I really have enjoyed this opportunity to talk to the voters of the state, and I ask for their support when they go to the polls this week or on Tuesday of next week.
Mr. Murphy, Mr. Corey, we thank you so much for being with us here tonight. That concludes the Connecticut U.S. Senate debate.
And we're going to take a quick break, and Tom Dutchick and the Capitol Report crew will have analysis for you. Stay with us.
No, that's all right. We could do our own analysis. I mean, like, you guys tell me, man. Like, I don't know if there was really a clear winner of the debate. I mean, if I had a gun to my head, because I'm familiar with the policy positions of these folks, like, if I had a gun to my head, I would say it was Matt Corey. But goddamn. Like, in terms of policy, in terms of winning me over, I mean, I love Matt Corey's responses in all of these situations. Like, I think he had a really, really, really good debate performance. And I think Chris Murphy is just a slimeball. Like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, I'm going to have to do a video at some point on Gish Gallop, because, like, the number of just, like, facially untrue statements that he made, like, I don't even know where to start. Let me know in the comment section if you want my, I'll save these notes, and if you want to see these notes. For your own record. And I'll put a link at the top of the notes so you guys can get to where this video is. By the way, it's embedded at the top of the page, right? So if you want to see this video, it's not like in the article right here. This is the analysis that they do, right? You have to go to the top of the article and go to that top right bubble there. And that's where I'm popping this out from, which is wild, but hey, it's what it is. It's what it is. All right, so what was the next thing on the agenda? Oh, we got Hayes versus Logan and Harris versus Trump. So yeah. Let's just do a quick wrap up of this debate. So for me, Corey seemed like a totally reasonable, regular Republican. I wish he would have focused on certain points that Murphy brought up, but like, it's tough to deal with the incumbent in a state where, like, you're probably going to lose, Matt. It's tough to say that. He's probably going to lose. So, there are some positions he has to be kind of moderate on, which, I would prefer a more libertarian candidate as the crazy libertarian in town. But what can I say? Right? So, as far as the performance is concerned, I give him a pretty good grade. And you know what the big takeaway for me from this is, damn, WTNH gets a solid A. Maybe not an A+, but a solid A. In under an hour, in 45 minutes, you guys managed to ask a ton of really good questions. And in a very fair and even-handed manner, right? Like, maybe it's because it's local news, but like, the national ABC channels have been like as one-sided politically as you possibly can get, and have been just a propaganda machine for the DNC. So maybe it's that what we have is because we have the local station handling this. I thought the way WTNH handled the question asking and the moderation was actually brilliant.